But happening just moments ago now, North Korea's United Nations ambassador warning the United States that, quote, a thermonuclear war may break out at any moment. Here to discuss, Fort O'Connell, Emily Jashinsky, and Christopher Bedford. Chris, I'll start with you. They have done a lot of saber rattling today from ministers who said that they will launch missiles on a monthly, weekly, annual basis. But this talk now of thermonuclear war, it doesn't get any more dire than that.
No, and I think it's partially a reaction to a little bit of embarrassment that they had Vice President Pence standing there on the border, staring them down, saying that this has changed, this is going to change, the United States is absolutely tired of this, we're not going to take your temper tantrums anymore. The problem for the United States and for Pence and for Trump and for everyone else here is they keep on kind of saying, listen, China has to sort this out, which does show you a little bit that China is absolutely necessary to doing this. North Korea has just through conventional, old-fashioned, 50-year-old cannons, artillery, the ability to level Seoul, to cause huge amounts of casualties and make a war very, very difficult. And China, so far, doesn't really seem to have much of a reason to come to the table on this with us. So the Trump administration is in a tough spot, and everyone's going to throw a lot of bluster around.
A lot of bluster, Emily, but by the same token, although no official red lines, by essentially saying to North Korea that you're going to have to get your act together, or as President Trump just said to earlier today, they, quote, have to behave. They've never had before, so what might make this change this time?
Well, yeah, Chris is right. I mean, China doesn't have, there isn't really much pushing them to come to the table with us on this. But what's so interesting, though, is how we saw President Trump no longer referring to China as a currency negotiator. That's very interesting because it does mean that President Trump is negotiating himself with China. So there are things going on behind the scenes. In this case, in front of the scenes that we all saw. I think Vice President Pence was really careful but forceful in his words, and I do agree that this may be a reaction to what is kind of embarrassing because he was very authoritative and at the same time careful, and it was, I think, very much embarrassing for North Korea. So hopefully this is a reaction to that. But we have different negotiators in office now, and it could be different than the previous 3 terms. We could see more strength from the United States, and I think we are already seeing that. Oh,
there's no doubt that we've seen more strength from this president, whether it was the salvos in Syria in response to Assad or the Moab, mother of all bombs. President Trump not allowing his generals to engage for it. But by the same token, this rocket, this North Korean rocket that more or less fizzled on the launching pad, they've had those kind of mistakes before. We know that they're not going to stop. And you ultimately have to wonder, will China or can China even truly intervene?
Well, China can intervene if it wants to because it is North Korea's primary trading partner, and if they do shut down economic sanctions on North Korea, there's some real problems here. But I have to say that President Trump is absolutely right to pursue the doctrine of strategic impatience versus North Korea's threat at every moment, because essentially China wants to avoid a humanitarian crisis of 25 million North Koreans flooding across their border. North Korea is on the cusp of being able to put a nuclear warhead towards the United States or any of its allies. So this is the right time to do this. And understand something. If we back down or we back away, North Korea will be that much closer. And guess what? They're going to continue this saber rattling no matter what. And what we want is we want China to quarterback regime change. And North Korea, they can pick their person. They can do whatever so long as they're responsible. And we'll get the heck out of their hair. And I think that Donald Trump's absolutely right.
Ford, let me ask you, though, do you think so far Donald Trump tweeting over the weekend with respect to not calling China a currency manipulator, China probably feeling, okay, they've got some room here to maybe get more concessions, maybe even on the whole trade stuff that we heard during the campaign. How far do you think the administration is willing to go if China can indeed mediate this situation with respect to giving China less anxiety over some of the things that they thought they would encounter, like a potential trade war?
Well, to your point, what Donald Trump is initiating is a dialogue with China, with North Korea in the middle, that's not that different than what Kennedy deployed with the Soviet Union over the Cuban Missile Crisis. He's trying to feel them out and trying to see exactly what it's going to take, what that mix of levers and that type of deal may be. It may be giving away the strategic islands in the South China Sea. It may be a lot of different things, but what Donald Trump wants at the end of the day is a stable North Korea with the Chinese overlooking this. But understand something else, Charles, it never gets mentioned. It was the Soviet Union that installed the Kim dynasty, and once the Soviet Union collapsed, basically this is a madman and a dynasty out of control, and no one's actually ever pointing the finger here at the Russians for their involvement in this too.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Emily, when the Soviet Union collapsed, almost Some accounts have 3.5 million North Koreans starving to death over a 4-year period, and yet the Kim family retained power. So you have to wonder if you can ever get true regime change there outside of some sort of assassination, and it certainly wouldn't be one of those generals who are afraid to even make the wrong move in any direction.
Right. I think that's really interesting because this is a unique situation. It's something that we don't necessarily see in this way in other parts of the world. So I do think that the approach to it does need to be a little bit more creative, and I think we've seen that over the course of administrations that have failed and failed and failed to take care of this problem. Again, I do want to point back to the importance of Donald Trump. This was a huge thing on the campaign trail for him, talking about how China manipulates currency. That was really big. So to see him being a little softer there, I really think is positive. I think that means he's willing to say, China, we have to talk. It's an indication of how dire the situation I think he sees of what's going on in North Korea right now. You see things differently when you're in the situation.
Would it be, is it so dire that we leave in those tariffs that they level against American companies? Do we go with that reciprocal sort of trade policy that's been talked up?
Yeah, that's the cost-benefit analysis that I'm sure President Donald Trump right now is really thinking about, because it's coming to decision time, and I'm sure he'll have to come up with an answer to that very soon. Speaking
of decision time, Chris, I think the Carl Vinson's scheduled to be within near North Korea sometime later this month. It's barreling ahead. Of course, this is the armada that President Trump talked about, and it feels like something is going to happen over the next 2 weeks. It feels like the bluster that you guys are talking about with respect to the leaders of North Korea and this firm, rigid resolve of the Trump administration, something's going to come to a head, Chris.
Yeah, you have Russia moving to shadow them. You have China moving to shadow the U.S.'s carrier group. And one thing, we've been talking a lot about what the United States really wants here, which is a de-escalation. We want to get rid of some of the offensive power of a crazy regime. But what exactly does China want? And it looks like what most likely China wants is a stable border where they don't have the United States military or one of its allies right up against their country. Right now, they've pretty much held them at South Korea, at the DMZ. But for China to actually want to do something to de-escalate this before our carrier group arrives, they would probably try to take military concessions out of the United States, not just tariffs, and probably not just moving our troops out of South Korea. It would take more, and we wouldn't be willing to do it.
To Chris's point, believe it or not, word on the street is that the USS Nimitz and the Ronald Reagan are actually going to join the Carl Vinson. So let me tell you something. Donald Trump is literally trying to pull every lever possible to figure out exactly what the Chinese want, because unless China basically makes this happen, the plan B is going after the 23 nuclear sites in North Korea, and we don't want an okay corral there.
That is